Test, test, test. Test mic 2. Test mic 3.
Test, test. Test, test. Test, test.
Test, test. You have to have them really close. They're, like, you have to have it, they should be longer. You have to lean into them. Hello. That's convenient.
Test, test. Mic 1. Test, test. Mic 2. Test, test. Mic 3.
So I was talking to James, and he was, oh,
Oh, I listen. I just don't pay attention.
How you been, brother?
You missed the cone. I've been good. Yourself?
Oh, good. Just crazy day at work.
How is the mortgage rate business these days?
It's good. It's just that, you know, you got crazy people that don't know what they're doing.
That's why they call upon you, of course. Although I was talking to somebody today about something I thought, I'm trying to help you, but you're going to have to be more intelligent than you are. For me,
They're not.
you.
They're not at all.
Anyway,
Not at all. What do you mean you blame the city manager? That's not right. Already, they're blaming the city. Stephen texted me, said we'd have mics, but the new city manager. I'm good. Good. It's good to be back. The real world. And I bought my Upland binder that I got for Christmas.
I'm politically incorrect, I guess.
Why?
I didn't bring mine.
Oh, well, neither did they. You guys didn't bring this, did you?
Actually, I have it in the museum place.
She might walk in anytime. Look out.
If you hit the button, it'll turn green. In order for it to pick up your voice, you have to get it really close to your mouth. If it's off a little bit, we're not going to hear you. Yeah, if you don't hear your voice coming through, no one else can hear it. So you got to be about this distance in order for it to really pick you up. You can see it drops off real quick. So
Can't talk at all, right?
you'll have to.
Right?
So
Whoa, echo.
So you don't have to worry about feedback. The system knows how to cut the mics out to avoid feedback. So as long as you can hear yourself, you're good. And then just trade the mic back and forth for now. I'm going to try and get the mics working better next time.
Okay, welcome everybody to the December 1st meeting of the City Council Advisory Committee. And I'm proud to say we're in person, actually get to meet each other in person. So it's kind of the best early Christmas present. So now it's called to order. We're going to go ahead and do roll call. Want to do it? Okay.
Committee Member Breitling,
Present.
Committee Member Flores,
Present.
Committee Member Mariquin, Committee Member Osborne,
Present.
Chair Shori.
Keep pressing it. Present. Green light. All right, let's go ahead. We have oral communications. We have a presentation of the committee member orientation and Brown Act training. Are there any other oral communications that we have? Anybody waiting to talk? Anything like that?
No, we don't have any members of the public that requested to speak.
Then we're going to go ahead and go into the committee member orientation and Brown Act training.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Mike Blay. I'm the new city manager here. I've had the opportunity to meet a few of you, but not all of you. Welcome. Thank you for your service to the city of Upland. We are grateful. For some of you, this will be redundant, but for those of you who have been on the committee for a while but have not had yet the opportunity to get this Brown Act training, it is required for our committees. And so it's kind of just an overview, and I'm leaning forward. I feel like I'm all hunched over the microphone. As to how the city operates, the departments that we have, and your role within the city. So the city of Upland operates on a council-manager form of government. So the city council, comprised of 4 council members and an at-large mayor, are responsible for the policy decisions for the city, the legislative actions that guide the city based on that legislation. And then they hired me, of all people, to manage the city. So they hire a professional manager. And so the staff here reports to me. 2 of us report to the council. That's myself and the city attorney. Everyone else will report up generally through a director to me. And so the management of the city, a lot of times people will call a council member to try and get a pothole fixed. You're better off just calling me. And so, or even better, Public Works, the guys who are actually going to do the work. And so with that said, that's kind of the form of government that we have. And then the city's broken up into a number of departments in order to facilitate the operation of the city. Most of you know Mr. Parker here. He is the assistant city manager, and also his lesser-known title is the Director of Administrative Services. And so he's responsible for finance, currently the city clerk, human resources, IT, the library, Parks and Rec, and community services. And so anything that falls under that realm is his responsibility. Anything that goes wrong in that realm, I will be blaming him. And so on the development services side, they're responsible for development projects in the city, as well as our building and safety department, economic development, housing, and planning. So if a new business owner wants to come and occupy an existing building, or even better, build on a vacant piece of land, that's the place they start. They'll go to development services, speak to a planner, look at the city zoning, and see what's allowed to be built and operated in that area. Our police department is an obvious one. Police Chief Darren Goodman. The development services director is Bob Dahlquist. He's an Upland native, and we are grateful to have him. He's very experienced. Our police department is led by Chief Darren Goodman, and in addition to the police officers themselves, he has dispatchers, clerical staff, evidence technicians. He also oversees the animal control officers and the code enforcement officers. And so they can have a similar mission, and they fall under the oversight of the police department. On the public works side, our director is Braden Yu, and they are responsible for engineering, the completion, the design and completion of our capital improvement projects. So anytime you see a large-scale street paving project or a water utility project, that would fall under under Public Works and our engineering department. They're also responsible for facilities, the maintenance and upkeep of the building we're sitting in, City Hall, and the other city-owned buildings, as well as operations and our utility department, which is, for the most part, water, and then we are part of a JPA for sewer operations. The city has a total of 11 committees and/or commissions, and they serve as a conduit for citizen input. Many of you were asked by a council member to be on this committee, probably because of your standing in the community and the fact that you have a lot of contacts, and also you express an interest in the operation and the performance of our city. I know James is very active and has a lot of contacts, and who better to serve on that and hear the feedback and be able to give that feedback to the council, because that's really, in a sense, you're the eyes and ears, and you can give the council recommendations. So your role is, as a counselor / advisor, you won't get to make the legislative policy. That's the job of the council, but you will certainly be able to give them your input based on either your own input or the feedback that you've received from citizens. One of the things with 11 committees, it's very taxing on staff, as you can imagine. Each committee has a staff liaison. And in this case, I'm going to ask you to be very, very gentle with your liaison, because it's going to be me. And so one of the things is sometimes is tempering a lot of great ideas that come out of the committees that take a lot of staff time to try and see to fruition. So one of the things that we try and do is have you work directly with your liaison, which would be me in this case, but on the other committees, it'll be a staff member, and really kind of temper the requests that would eat away at that staff member's ability to do a lot of other work. Most of the staff members here at Upland wear a lot of hats, and at the end of every job description is "and other duties as assigned." So you've probably seen that maybe at places you've worked. We take that literally. We're not playing, like literally other duties as assigned. So all of them have those, and so we're sensitive to that on our committee. So that's kind of the role there. The staff liaison will be your point person, so you can communicate directly with me. I actually got my business cards yesterday. I'll share with you before I leave today. You'll have my business card. It'll have my email address and my phone number, and you can communicate with me directly, as well as directly to your own council member. So by communicating with me, it's instead of other staff members, if something needs to get done or looked at, but also you're welcome to communicate directly with your council member. So I mentioned the number of boards, the Economic Development Committee, Finance Committee, Public Safety Committee, and Public Works Committee. So they're on the legislative side of that list, and that means they include 2 council members. Can't have any more than 2 council members, because that would be a violation of the
Brown Act.
Brown Act. Yeah, anytime 3 or more of them get together, it's a public meeting and it has to be noticed. So, but those committees will have 2 council members, and the other committees are advisory committees. CDBG, City Council Advisory Committee, that's you. Environmental Sustainability, that's a new one. The Library Board, Parks, Street, Trees, the Building Board of Appeals, and the Personnel Board of Review. So as you can see, we've got a lot of committees, and we like an engaged community, and that's the reason some of these committees have come about. Does anybody have any questions before I pass you back to Carrie? Thank you for your service to Upland. I personally am very grateful, and I know our council is as well.
Thank you.
Welcome aboard.
So today we're going to do a broad overview of the Brown Act. There's a lot of details involved in it. So over the course of your service here, if you ever have a question at any time, please don't hesitate to contact the city clerk's office. We're always happy to answer any questions that you So we're going to start out with why we have the Brown Act. In 1952, a journalist called Michael Harris wrote a series of articles for the San Francisco Chronicle called Your Secret Government. And it detailed how boards, special districts, and city councils were having meetings without notifying the public, and they were held behind closed doors where important decisions were made without the public being given the opportunity to provide input or participate in the process. So in 1953, Ralph M. Brown authored the Brown Act, and it was signed into law. It's been updated many times since that time. Most recently, it addresses social media, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later, because as we know, that's becoming a bigger part of everybody's lives. So a major part of the Brown Act is that all meetings are open to the public and that the public has an opportunity to participate, which brings us to the three major principles of the Brown Act, which are notice to the public, an opportunity for the public to participate and be heard, and transparency in decision-making. It's intended to prevent backdoor deals where the public is not made aware until after decisions are made. So what is a meeting? As Mike mentioned previously, a majority of members constitutes a meeting. And a meeting is where you all get together in the same time and place and discuss things under your subject matter purview. So anytime you're a member, you're a 5 board member, so anytime 3 of you get together, that's a quorum, and it constitutes a meeting, and it has to be properly noticed. So there are opportunities where all of you could get together, and it's not considered a meeting. Those are conferences that are open to the public, community meetings, meetings of other legislative bodies. For example, you can all attend a city council meeting and you're not violating the Brown Act. And also social and ceremonial events. So if there's a ribbon cutting in town, you can all attend. Even though you can attend all those events, you're still discouraged from all gathering together. And if you do, you definitely can't discuss anything which is under your subject matter purview. And for this particular committee, that encompasses a lot because the council can refer anything to you to review and discuss and give them recommendations. So there's another type of meeting where you won't all get together at the same time and place, and those are called serial meetings. And those can happen when there's communications that don't happen when you're all in the same place. And one type of that is called a daisy chain, and that would be where member number 1 contacts member number 2, and then member number 2 contacts member number 3 and says, this is what we discussed, what do you think? Now a majority have communicated about that item, and that's a violation of the Brown Act. And the same can happen, there's called the hub and spoke, and that's where one member kind of pulls all of the members or a majority of members to get their opinion on something that's coming before the committee. And as I discussed a little bit earlier, that can include emails, social media, blogging, any type of communication. It's not just in person or via the telephone. And as social media becomes more popular and we use it in our day-to-day lives, even just clicking like on something that another member comments about under your purview is considered a violation of the Brown Act. So we really want to discourage members from communicating with each other outside of meetings. Doesn't mean you can't friend another member on social media, wish them happy Thanksgiving or Happy New Year or whatever, but you have to be very cautious about it. It's very easy to click like on something and then think later, like maybe I shouldn't have done that. And that brings us to the next aspect, is the requirements of a meeting. So you can't just decide tomorrow to all get together and talk about Euclid Avenue decorations for the holidays. It's not allowed because you have to have proper noticing for a meeting. So for a regular meeting, it has to be noticed at least 72 hours in advance to the public, and we have, my office takes care of that requirement. We post it on our website, 3 physical locations, including the location of the meeting, and then we also send it out to anybody that requests to be on a distribution list for agendas. We send them all the agendas as requested. Special meetings only require 24 hours notice, but like I said, for regular meetings, that's a 72-hour requirement. And then there are violations of the Brown Act happen. Most of the time it's inadvertent, and there's no like punitive, you're not going to be sent to jail because you violated the Brown Act. But repetitive intentional violations of the Brown Act can be dealt with in the courts. And it's just to show the importance of that and to remember that there is a criminal prosecution aspect, but it does have to be intentional and repetitive violations. But if at any time you feel that there has been a violation of the Brown Act, you should contact your staff liaison or my office, because it's the city's responsibility to cure and correct that. And if that means that there was discussion of an item that was not on the agenda, we would probably have a special meeting, agendize it again, and go through the proper process. If a decision was made, that decision would need to be rescinded and done at a proper meeting. So there are things that we can do to correct that. So if you do feel that there's something that happened, you should contact us. And it may be that there was no violation, or it may be that there's something the city has to do to correct that. So does any questions?
To be clear, because this has come up before as far as the question. So committee member number 1 and number 2 get together for lunch. They can talk about whatever they want to talk about because it's just 2 people, right?
That's correct.
And then let's say committee number 3 and number 4 get together and they talk about whatever they want to talk about. But should committee, either one of those people talk to anybody else, including committee member number 5, because I'll never get invited to lunch, but that's okay. But if they talk to the other person that are outside of that original 2, that's a violation.
That's correct.
And believe it or not, in training that we've had before, that's one of the most common innocent mistakes that is made. So just to be clear.
And if you do get contacted by a member that says, I want to talk about, the facility naming policy, but Sandra's already talked to James, and Monica calls Sandra. Sandra would just need to say, I'm sorry, I've already spoken to a member about that. The discussion will have to wait until we're in the open meeting. And that's how you can avoid that. Any other questions?
We can discuss things that we're doing as residents that are unrelated to city council, though, right?
You can, but again, among the committee members, you want to be cautious because anything, in this particular committee, you're not just focused on street trees or parks. Anything can be referred to you. But if you're talking about something as a resident, that's okay. Or a new restaurant in downtown, or that type of thing.
Like if you're talking about, oh my God, wasn't that a great Christmas parade, or the Kiwanis had a great golf tournament or something, I mean, those things are fine. But I think what I've learned over the years is anything that even, borders policy issues in the city, that's where you got to take a step back and not do that. If I'm wrong.
No, you're correct. It is
See,
very,
if my wife was here, she'd tell me I was wrong.
especially with this committee, but it's only among the 5 members. You can talk to staff about anything, any, concerns, anything like that. It's not among the members and staff. It's just among the 5 members of the committee. Any other questions? Well, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Carrie, as usual. Great job. We're going to move on to business items, and committee members will look for approval of the minutes of the meeting from September 1st. Unless there's any additions or corrections, I'd like to hear a motion.
Move the minutes.
Moved by committee member Breitling. We have a second.
Second.
Second by committee member Flores. We're going to do a just a hand raised vote. All in favor of the minutes being approved, raise your hand. It approved 5-0. We don't have the little buttons to push here. Okay. All right, moving on. Old business. 5A, facility naming policy. Who's here to talk to us about that?
I am, Chair.
Mr. Stephen Parker. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Green light, by the way, green light.
Green light, we're good to go. All right, the item that's before you today is a follow-up of our previous conversation, which related to the establishment of a donation policy. So in our previous discussion, we spoke about the existing facility naming policy and how maybe we should modify it. This group basically agreed that in its current state, that policy is pretty good. However, it is missing an element that could be included in as an additional policy for the city, and that would be in how we accept donations, defining what they are and the like. Graciously, this committee said that you would do the legwork on this and provide samples and then go through those together, which is what we have time to do today. There's 3 attachments to the staff report that are examples that were provided by staff members. And so I'd leave the floor open to you on how you want to go through that, recommendations you want to make for what that policy could look like, and how you want to hand that over, and in what shape you want to hand that over to staff to follow up on. Now, there is a little caveat I've thrown in. If you'd like, I can wait until we get through all of that. But I've turned this old business item into a new business item as well, with something else that came up in the last couple of weeks with our city attorney. Chair, would you like to just talk about the donation policy first?
I think to get the old business out of the way first would probably be the best approach, and then that way we go forward with that. So why don't we stick to that path, unless my fellow committee members, is that cool? Okay. And I'm just reading on what Michael is telling me to do. So, Committee Member Osborne.
Just a question. As I was looking at the things that were submitted and reviewing our conversation, my question is, in the course of a year, ballpark, how many donations come the city's way that need to be processed? Whether it's a plaque issue, or whether it's a services issue, or whether it's a money issue. Going back to the original thing that brought this up, a plaque was an important piece of that because of how the wording was suggested. But the bigger picture was there was a lot of steps that apparently had either not been codified or had been missed and didn't have any approval, or the policy said the city without knowing any more than that. But the magnitude of the situation came to my question, because the more complicated the policy is, the more times you're going to have to spend staff time. So in a given year, how often does a donation come up, all the way from saying, I want to put something on the trail and I'd like to put our name next to it, to I want to assemble people to make a whole basketball renovation and all the things that come with it, the plaque being the least expensive piece of that.
Right.
So what's the magnitude of donations as a ballpark?
Well, I just reached out to the longest tenured employee in the room to see if she had any help for me. I think I'm on my own on this one. Public Works would be the group that would probably receive the majority of that information. I'm not too privy to it. Thinking back on what I'm familiar with in this calendar year, I'm remembering a Girl Scout, a couple of Girl Scouts who installed doggy waste bag stations, and there was a little plaque that went along with that installation. Obviously, the basketball courts that brought up our item, an item that just went to council that won't happen until next year on parklets. The one element I didn't include in my presentation that could come into play for more of those would be that we at any point will receive, are willing to receive donations for trees and park benches. So if you go on our website, I'm told it's a little outdated. We have other things like flagpoles that we're willing to accept, but I've been told by Richard Smitterly, our operations manager, that we are only receiving those two right now. Now, at any point, the city, I'd like the public to be aware, we're willing to accept your donations of cash, but looking at the most recent financials, that hasn't been a frequent occurrence. So I believe it is rather limited in scope, and that's perhaps why this hasn't come up earlier. But yeah, the primary donations would be those park benches or trees.
I don't believe the issue of trees or a flagpole or a park bench or anything else is where this is headed. I think the differing of opinions, to put it nicely, about the basketball courts and the statue or the sculpture, or whatever you want to call it, that was raised, and the dedication of that is more what this is going to be aimed for. I don't know. I'd be hard pressed to find anybody in the city of Upland that would say, "Oh no, the Girl Scouts can't say because they raised money and put a a dog dispenser, bag dispenser on the trail, that they can't say Girl Scout pack, whatever, you know.
Or they can, but it has to go to city council for approval first.
Well, which is fine, and again, I can't imagine that. But I think that for this committee, you know, I think those are kind of ancillary things that we can go ahead and say, yeah, those are, you know, going to come up before council anyway. That's fine. I believe that, especially from our last long discussion we had in September, this is about edifices that are huge, you know, and stuff like that, and then who gets the credit and who doesn't get the credit and who's going to be put on there or whatever. And if I'm wrong, I mean, am I wrong? Is that everybody? Jim? Okay, that's why he's here.
I only disagree to the point that if the magnitude of donations, whether they be a value of $20 or whether it be a value of 40,000 plus for benches, or whether it be the value of the basketball court, which has a numerous number of aspects to it, that transparency to the city is the issue. Transparency to the city is the issue, so whatever we lost in transition. My observation was that it's transparency, which is the goal of the city, that whether the donation is $20 or $40,000, that because the frequency is not high, it's not burdensome to allow the city to create transparency. My next statement is that a departmental review doesn't have any transparency. There's no visibility. You can ask the department, but whether we have lots of people paying attention or few, the only public forum that is easily accessible is the city council meeting. So if we say that the Public Works Department or some other department has in fact reviewed properly and made a recommendation for acceptance against some of the other criteria that they would know of, nobody knows about that. There's no public meeting, there's no record, so there's no transparency. So if it takes the city council to review a Girl Scout donation, or the, for lack of a better word, the more charged discussion of a major project with a statue and a plaque, with various people vying for notice on the plaque, then I think it's worth the transparency, particularly with the district system, because every council district has the ability to monitor or to discuss with their own group. So, in my view, transparency is important, and the frequency of a donation to be discussed, minor or major. If I was part of a Girl Scout troop, and one of my grandkids is, then I would want to know that perhaps the city, as a council, recognized the donation, because the magnitude of that donation relative to them was huge. So, in my proposal, but we had some other great people that submitted things, I would just recommend that we keep transparency in mind versus a streamlined process, when in fact this might come up no more than half a dozen times a year. And when it comes up, it's the issue that comes up, and the magnitude of the issue may vary, but it's not burdensome to the council.
Before I go there, to be clear, I'm 100% with you that even if it's a Girl Scout thing, it needs to go to council. I never meant to imply that it wouldn't go to council. Like, as much as it would be quote unquote potentially rubber stamped, it still needs to be in front of the public, let the council decide. So if I gave a misleading opinion, that's not it. But thank you for calling that out so we can make it clear. Everything needs to go to council so the council can approve it. We just need to get policies in place to suggest to them to follow. Committee Member Breitling?
I completely agree with Don. Transparency is the reason that this was brought up to this committee. And whether the donation is small, or whether it requires storage, or requires electricity, or requires maintenance that costs the city to hold that, all that should be encompassed into one document. So I absolutely agree. And I think it's important that we treat that $40,000 donation or that $20 donation exactly the same in particular with part of what I recommended was first of all, the acknowledgement of it. I think that's important. And with regards to the department head, because from the point, in my mind, the point from where a donation is offered, it becomes an administrative process, which is why to me that part is not part of the transparency until it reaches the level of, okay, you've submitted, we've reviewed, and then from there going to the council for final approval. That to me was the transparent part of it. But I just want to say I completely agree with you. Mr. Parker, I had a quick question. During the apartment fire, sorry, the city received donations, I would assume, at that time, or was that handled by?
Yeah, the city did not receive direct donations that I'm aware of. There were different aspects of the city departments that had funds that were distributed. The fire department had funds that were distributed, but I'm not aware of us soliciting. What we did was partner with UCRC to have them be the recipient and distributor of public donations.
Thank you.
Chair, if I may, what I'm hearing highly relates to the new business aspect that I put in here. And maybe you'll let me mention that because it seems like there's a lot of correlation between the two topics.
Well, gosh, I don't know, Mr. Parker. Should I? Okay, I'll let you. No, dude, please go at it, please.
Appreciate that, sir. So the item that most recently came up related, and before I get going, I apologize. I had provided the wrong resolution number when I was on vacation last week, and Megan put the resolution number that I gave her in your attachment, but that wasn't the correct one. It should have been Resolution 6105. I hope you didn't read it in depth. Megan has forwarded the correct resolution, or the one that I intended to attach to you in your personal email. The key aspect of it is in the staff report. So it's really, there's one bullet point that I identified in the staff report. But the issue that came up this last month was relating to Kiwanis considering providing a $40,800 donation to the city in exchange for paying for park benches that the city was already proposing to find alternative funding for, to include in parklets in the downtown, in the downtown parklets project. They were asking for an opportunity to kind of get their name out there, be made aware of, and the assumption would be that there'd be a little plaque on it, on each bench that says provided by Kiwanis or something like that. That's something that we've similarly done many places in many parks throughout the city. And you can find on our website a way to go and do that yourself currently. When I heard about that and was reviewing the staff report, I thought, okay, we're getting into a potential plaque. We dealt with a plaque recently. We don't have necessarily everything fully settled. And I went back to our donation policy to try to figure out exactly what does it say. And the bullet point that is applicable, the fourth bullet point of section 4D, which if anyone's looking at home, it's not there attached. The city clerk can provide it to you if you'd like. It says, each plaque, marker, or memorial request will be reviewed by the Public Works Director prior to submission to the city. That phrase, submission to the city, was what our city attorney had interpreted earlier in the year as submission for approval of city council. And that's why the previous situation went to council for approval, and they made modifications, and I think in retrospect, all of them would agree that it was appropriate that it went to city for approval. However, when I was reading that in the context of this situation, and knowing that we have park benches that are donated annually with a 4x6 plaque of the donor's name on it, I read it differently, saying it will be reviewed by the Public Works Director prior to submission to the city, prior to that plaque being submitted to the city for installation on the bench, is the way I read it, that it may have been originally intended. So I reached out to the city attorney, and he agreed that it could be interpreted that way. None of us know what exactly the original authors were intending by that, but that was a valid approach. And he suggested that city council modify the policy to make clear which interpretation we're looking for in that. Now, this is going to be my opinion, completely different than the things that I've heard from this committee, and I'm going to say it because I walked in the door with it rather than I disagree with what I've heard. And that is that I don't believe the original intention was that, I believe the original intention was Public Works Director okays that language on a little 4x6 plaque that's going to go on the bench. And then they submit that 4x6 plaque to the city, we install it, and there you go. I think that's how it was originally intended. I think that's supported by, I can't find any evidence of any plaque going to city council for approval, whether that be more recently this year with the Girl Scouts and their waste bag stations, or benches for any year in the past. Those smaller items haven't gone to the council for approval. The question at hand is, at what threshold do we want to go to the council for approval? And the reason I thought of this committee was not only the overlapping with the situation that's already come before you, but because I don't think council wants to hash this out in a council meeting. They'd rather, you guys do the really hard work, give a recommendation, and then they can take that assessment. So the secondary item, the new business item before you today, that really does have a lot of overlap with the donation policy aspect, is there a threshold by which we want those items to go to council? And maybe the answer from what I'm hearing is yes, at $1, and that's fine. But I'd be seeking that advice on, is there a threshold, whether that be size of the plaque or dollar of the donation, at which point you do want to go to council. So that's all the talking I'll do for.
I'm going to jump in here, okay?
Yes.
So let's and I'm going to lean towards Committee Member Osborne's point of really how many of these do we have? It's not like, God willing, they'll be lined up out the door to do donations and stuff like that. I think that what should happen, is there should be some uniformity, all right? So in other words, a bench is going to be a 4x6 plaque, blah, 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 whatever it is. That's going to go on a waste station is going to be so big. We create, or staff creates, sizes and thank you, specs for each kind of donation. And then if it gets above that, go from there. However, to Committee Members Osborne's point, and I don't know what the rest of the committee feels, but at least from my position, it still should be brought up to the city council. And if it's going to be a bench, well, then it's just going to be, a rubber stamp. But at least if it's going to be something that might be outside of what the council believes should be represented by the city or something like that, the city council still has the last word, okay? And you're not going to have this, free-for-all of, oh my God, can you believe that the XYZ group of the ABC chapter did this sponsorship or whatever. I hear what you're saying. Going back to what City Manager Blaze said about workload on the city, on staff, I think this takes a little bit off of them. In other words, I think that, and if I'm wrong, tell me, but I think that what should happen is create policies. How many different types of donations can there be, right? Create policies or specs for those, put those in place, and then let them go before the city council and say, tonight we have 7 benches and these are the donors, blah, 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 and city council goes, okay, all in favor, they do as a group, or if a city council member wants to take one out and say, no, we're going to discuss that separately, they can, that kind of stuff, and then it's settled. It's not going to be much more than a 5-minute piece of the meeting, if that. Okay?
Yeah, and I would suspect that most of the common donations would actually be on a consent calendar item. They have the chance to view it, but it's not going to take up
Correct.
any of the council's time. To your comment, I don't think this would alleviate staff. I think it would be the opposite effect. That report has to be written. The doggy bag station, for instance, I found out about it the Monday after it was installed. I don't know how much headway there was, but if you're waiting for council approval before that happens, then there might be, difficulties and delays in getting things scheduled as well.
The council meets, what, every 2 weeks?
For the most part, yes.
I mean, okay. I'm just not for rubber stamping anything. I really think this is it's gonna be more of a formality, but if it's a park bench, it's a form. It's like, okay, here's park bench form, fill it out. These are your specs. Thank you for that, by the way. This is what's gonna happen. It's gonna go through. I don't understand, so please educate me of the burden on staff to have that happen any different than if they didn't have to go to council.
Well, and I'm just trying to address the comment that you made. I'm not saying that I disagree with it going to council, but there will be increased staff time and increased time in the installation process, in the whole, someone saying, I want to donate a bench to recognize a loved one that's passed away, and I want that to go in my local park where that loved one always spent their time. This just adds a little bit of time in that process to actually get it done. The staff person would have to coordinate with them to get it done, as we already do, but then we'd also have to draft the staff report and make sure it's available for council in time to then actually get it installed.
Okay, and
It's
again,
just a time delay and a little staff time involved in it.
one thing, and then, okay, then another question of education, okay? I've never had to do a staff report, so I don't understand. But is it not just, these are the donation, or these are the signs or the donations before you tonight that need to be approved? 3 park benches, 1 waste station, basketball, whatever, and then that goes before council?
Yeah. First of all, I'm assuming that you're saying before that is allowed to be installed. It would be,
100%.
right? Okay. So you're correct. Once that staff report says so-and-so is donating such and such for this purpose, maybe this is what that plaque looks like, or what the language that's on it, this is the size. Once that staff report is written that first time, you're going to use that as a template and modify it every other time. In your scenario, I don't think we're going to receive that many things in a given meeting. I think it'll be more like once every couple of months.
Right. I don't think, if somebody wants to modify the specs or the template or whatever, that's even more so for the city council. But I don't even think that personally that should be allowed. A park bench is a park bench. This is a sign, whatever, and then we just go through whatever these things are and set the policies for them. They're in place. The bigger projects like the basketball court or something like that, that's an obvious, definitive thing that's going to be a lot of work no matter what. But back to your point about prior to being installed, it's just like when I was on the planning commission, nobody could start building until the planning commission gave it its approval. And then then it had to be approved by council, if in whatever cases those were. So from my point of view, I'm on board with committee member Osborne and anybody else that the transparency part is it takes all the doubt out of it. Nobody can sit there and say, well, I didn't know about it. I didn't know about it. It was at the council meeting. This was going on from there. So that's it. Mr. Breitling.
Just to the point that was, we've gone past the point I was going to chime in on. But I think it's important to recognize there are a variety of different types of donations, and I think we keep moving in a direction where we keep forgetting that. Currently the city has a policy where, and I've seen this at Sierra Vista Park, there's 2 trees that have a stone with a plaque on it, and a memorial in memory of, which the person contacted, I'm assuming this is how it went, they contacted Public Works, they've got the application, they filled it out, they wrote what they wanted on there, that was received by the Public Works Director at the time, approved, and from that point, didn't go to council. I don't, so that's where I'm struggling, because that to me is just an administrative, but it's not. It's the exact same scenario, just on a smaller scale. I don't think that where it comes to the point where it creates more staff time is in that same scenario I just gave. Now the additional staff time comes in having to put it in a report for city council. That's the only additional staff time I think that's given. But yeah, if I'm going to treat that stone, the memorial stone, or that park bench, they should be treated the same. Just make it blanket.
Okay. I'm going to submit that there's a trade-off for that extra time. And that trade-off is that people, particularly in the larger scale, and maybe the simplest way to say it is the Kiwanis Club is an excellent organization, but they also need or want or deserve the awareness of the public of making a donation of that magnitude. But the reality is when an organization or a business or an individual gives to the city, the trade-off is they do want some recognition. Now, whether you want to call it undeserved or deserved. So when you allow the city to publicly thank at the council meeting, if you will, an organization like Kiwanis, everybody gets what they want. And there's nothing self-serving about it. It's just how things work. Now, granted, if somebody has a memorial tree that they'd like to be planted with a plaque in the city, that may not have the same transactional piece of it. But the point is, that's easily reported. So the fact of the matter is, if you create all the paperwork and then put it on the consent calendar, it allows everybody to get candidly what they want. The other is, I suspect that if more people knew more visibly of the donations that the Girl Scouts gave, the donations that the Kiwanis Club made, in the city of Upland, there's got to be at least a half a dozen philanthropic service organizations, Kiwanis, Lions, Rotary, Optimus, etc. And all these people donate all the time. But they're also an organization that would deserve the visibility of their donation. So I don't think it's a matter of what size the plaque is or how much it costs. Now, if we were a city that was processing 100 of these a month, well, hallelujah in one sense of the donation that's made. But the other side is we're not. We're a city that maybe once a quarter is going to have a minor donation that we calendar consented and a major donation that needs to be recognized for what it is. So I see it as a positive plus for whatever trade-off there is on staff time. And once you create the form and the format, I don't think it'll be a big deal. The thing that was missing in some of the language that we're addressing on the policy, the facility naming policy, was the fact that some of the words were too broad. Submission to the city. That's not directive. And some were too narrow, the public works perhaps. But in the realm of all that, plaques, memorials, art, etc., they get donated typically towards a very minor thing, a plaque on a tree, or they're part of an integral major project. But in all cases, the transparency is probably necessary to be there. Now, James put together a tremendous package of an idea of how that framework looks. And it has lots of detail about the department level activity, which may already fit what we have. And Aaron, your recommendation was a one page that spotted the fact that the language was a little vague. It just needed to be specific. I dug up something from a city that was probably our size, but their form was pretty simple. So it's my view that the directive is to ask that is to move, the motion would simply be to state that all donations to the city, which includes money, services, add that dimension because people sometimes donate money or manage the project. Part of the basketball court project was sort of managed by people who've done this all their lifetime. So whether it's the management expertise, the money, the plaque, the memorial, the art, all those different things, that all donations must ultimately be approved or voted upon by the council, which would not be burdensome in terms of quantity, but would be highly valuable in terms of transparency and suggest and encourage other people to make donations as well.
The,
Member Merrickwin.
Thank you. So the only thing that I have to add, because I think the reason this group was put together is because we all think alike, although it takes some time to get there sometimes, is that we should include that the donations should include all donors, whether they're public or private, which was part of narrowing the language. And so Mr. Osborne's suggestion for a motion that all donations to the city, he indicated, he specified money, memorials, art. I think the only thing that we could add there that would probably narrow it a little bit more is say, to include, but not limited to. And then that will encompass other types of donations that we're not necessarily aware of. And they can vary in size. That must be approved by the city council.
I think that even something like the memorial to a memorial stone under a tree needs to be approved publicly, only because if that person in the memoriam is not liked by somebody that frequents that park, and they say, I got to go by that tree every day and see that person's name, because that's the society we unfortunately we live in, I think we need the backing, and I keep coming back to the word that came up with Don of transparency. Is it, guys, it was at the meeting, it was public. This wasn't a rubber stamp backroom deal. This is it. I think that's what this whole thing is aimed at. I think that's what caused this in the first place. So our recommendation to the city is look at, my suggestive recommendation that we make is, look at council, you're elected to run the city. I mean, to, along with the city manager, set the policies and go from there. You're gonna set the tone, and that's what's gonna be. But, you know, I liked what you had, James, as far as your thing that I read when you put it out last time, but a little amendment to that, just let it all get done and it's fine. Absolutely. Committee Member Flores.
Yeah, so to, sorry, Monica, I don't want to mispronounce your last name. To your point, in the definitions, it does say not limited to. On James's submission, when we get to that part, I think it does cover everything that Mr. Parker's talking about here. As far as the naming, different levels of donations, I think we're all in agreement here that we would all, I mean, if we voted on it or not, I think we all agree that everything should go before City Council. I think as representatives of the residents, I think that they would feel more comfortable having their elected officials make these decisions rather than a staff member who, of course, they did not elect. And it puts, I would say, less pressure on the staff member, because what they can rubber stamp is the staff report. I mean, it's with these forms that have been submitted by James here, the donor would do all of the work and they would just have to forward that pretty much to City Council. I think when we get to the outlining of this, which you will probably do, James, and when we go over that, I think it covers everything that you guys have talked about.
I mean, go ahead.
Just one last part. To go back to why the reason we were assigned this. If I recall, and please correct me if I'm wrong, we should treat everything equally. I agree. But there is a difference, I think, when it comes to transparency in the feeling of why we came to have this subject discussed. Meaning, when you install a to have the donation, it's a wonderful donation to install or redo a basketball court, and then that's one part. And then to have art or other pieces incorporated into that donation, almost to the point where at staff level, getting to the city council, it's too late at that point. Where the community, I think, would have been a little bit less upset was if there was either a workshop or something to involve the community as part of that donation. Because to be given a donation of here's a statue versus do we want the statue? Can we talk about the statue? That the community would have felt better if they were part of the discussion, maybe even turned down, fine. But just to be talked about at that point versus at the council level where the statue was already up and for approval.
Okay, so the challenge I see with that is that then you go vogue. You go rogue.
Correct.
There's no
Absolutely.
boundaries at all.
Right.
I mean, I think that the parks, and I don't know if the parks, let's talk about a statue on a baseball field, so we don't talk about the statue, okay? I would imagine that renderings, okay, would be presented to a Parks and Rec committee, okay? And the Parks and Rec committee would be that one that would, where the people, are those public meetings? Okay, so then if the public wants, it gets noticed, and then there's gonna be a meeting, and they come to the Parks and Recs, and that's it, and so, because I want to create more work.
That's what I've proposed.
Right.
Right.
But then, once that is done, those renderings and everything else go to council.
Correct.
Okay, I just think that, but what I'm getting at, and I don't want to put words in Don's mouth, is that anything, as simple as a Girl Scout plaque on because they should, and if they want to be at the meeting to do it, what better to let young ladies get I used to love when I chaired the commission and there'd be public thing, and you'd have 10, 11, 12-year-old boys or girls get up and speak in favor or against the issue. What better is that than for our city to allow that kind of forum for that to happen? So I think that, like Ms. Maricon said, we're all kind of marching in the same direction. It's just, we have a couple different color shoes on, but I think we're going in the same way. I don't want to create any more work for staff than necessary, but I don't really see that it is creating more staff other than the staff report that goes to the council meeting, because they have to do all this anyway if they're going to approve it. But I think that, something like that's going to be an edifice in a large edifice in a public place, okay, needs to go to a Parks and Recs committee and needs to be noticed and needs to be discussed and let the public come and speak about it. And then once that happens, the Parks and Rec committee decides on it one way or the other. And that requires, just like a planning commission issue that requires city council approval, it becomes a recommendation to the council. The council goes through it, and then the people can come, and if they want to speak at the city council meeting against it, for or against it, they can do it just like they did on the planning commission. That's what should happen. And I think, I was wondering, does anybody have a motion? No. Unless you guys have anything else you want to add before the motion? Is that okay, Don?
I'd feel terrible doing a preemptive motion, but from what I'm hearing on the small things that you're talking about, doing a staff report before a little plaque relating to any number of small donations comes into play, I think that's really easily done. You're right. Once that staff report gets done, once we have our policies in place, once staff knows that this is the process, so the donor knows right up front, oh, just so you know, there's another layer in that process. We get that ironed out. I don't think that's complicated. The new business before you today, from what I've heard, is solved by just changing the existing facilities naming policy, that fourth bullet point of section 4D. It currently says each plaque, marker, or memorial request will be reviewed by the Public Works Director prior to submission to the city. If we change that to prior to admission to the City Council for approval, then it goes with what I've heard here. And that element is a couple of words. It makes it very clear, though, that everything would fall into that threshold. So I think for the new business, it's actually way easier than the old business if you're supportive of that recommendation. There's one other item, though. When we're talking on a large-scale project, think Veterans Memorial or Monument. There's a number of donations have come to the city through the Community Foundation. And the benefit to the city by it being done by the Community Foundation, besides the fact that dozens of donors and all this community effort has gone to benefit a public place. Besides that, there's a benefit in that if the city were to do that exact same work, you'd have prevailing wage laws that have to be followed, and the cost would be at least 50% higher. There's an element at play in those bigger projects that I want to make sure we still consider. I'm not saying that there shouldn't be maybe renderings approved through Parks Committee prior to City Council. But at some point, we could get on thin ice of, well, that's actually a city project rather than it's a project being done by the community without those prevailing wage standards that then is being donated to the city at the end of the process. I'd like to hand over the microphone to Mr. Blais to add anything he'd like, also because I'm trying to work myself out of this committee. Not that I don't love you guys, and I'll still show up, but if he's going to be the one carrying on, I'd like to make sure he gets an opportunity to share as well.
I second.
That was exactly my motion, but I could change it.
That was it. It's real easy to accomplish what you asked for as it relates to a bench or a tree or those type of donations. The one time, easy to do. The projects that take a little bit longer and sometimes morph. And so, although it predated my arrival, what I'm imagining is that the resurfacing of the basketball court took on additional assistance as the project developed. More people pitched in along the way, and perhaps we didn't know at the start of the project who was going to be recognized on a plaque at the end of the project, and all of a sudden, an extra group or somebody else came in and participated, and we didn't know about that ahead of time, so we couldn't pre-approve that plaque. We're going to have to come to the council maybe multiple times for one project. It was my only thought, and the other one was what me and Stephen were whispering about. We weren't trying to be rude, but the prevailing wage is something that I would probably want to run past the city attorney as to if the council approves a project prior to it beginning, is that a city project or is that still a donation? Because those fears are real as to the costs of differences between a city project and a privately funded and performed project.
Wait a minute, though. So if I'm a member of an organization and I come to the city and say, our organization wants to erect this memorial, or whatever it's going to be, and the city council approves that, I know you're going to check with the city attorney, but I'm not an attorney, but I did play one on TV one time. But the point is, why can't we just go ahead and do why would that have to be prevailing wage to have the city do it, city employees do it? If the city is approving, like
The city is the beneficiary of it. It occurs on city property. So unlike the planning commission, where once we bless it, a developer is free to use whatever labor he wants to build it on his own property.
on his own property.
So the enhancement, the benefit would be directly provided to the city. The city would receive that benefit and be providing the approval for said work. I don't know that we're again,
Ounce of
we're on
prevention
thin
for the
ice,
county here.
but it would be something I would want to look at, again, as opposed to a bench, a tree. Those easy things, absolutely, those would be easy to do. These projects that we'd like to paint a building or we'd like to enhance a basketball court in some way, add a little bit of complexity.
All right, well, let's get a motion and we'll see where we're going. Mr. Osborne.
Preceding the motion, I will say just two things. We're talking about transparency with the use of public property. And the notes I made to myself was that the key point here, this is public property of which we put things on through donation of different things. Now, there may be some exceptions to this, but it's public property, and I think the transparency is to make sure that all the city has an awareness mechanism for what's occurring on public property. The larger projects certainly need a very clear avenue of departmental oversight, et cetera, and need to be packaged perhaps differently moving forward than they were before. But the ad hoc side at least becomes transparent by way of process at the department level. So, with that said, I'm sure it could be worked out, but the motion I wrote down was, I move the acceptance of all donations of money, services, facilities, plaques, statues, art, and memorials to the City of Upland be approved by the City Council after proper review by the appropriate city department.
May I speak to that? Yeah, wait for a second.
Yeah. This is a 17-word single sentence. I move the acceptance of all donations of money, services, facilities, plaques, statues, art, and memorials to the City of Upland be approved by the City Council after proper review by the appropriate city department.
Sure, you're just adding acceptance of all donations, including but not limited to, and then you go through the list.
Do you accept that amendment? Okay. So, now we have a motion on the floor before we call the question. Oh, I thought okay.
you seconded it.
Second by Commissioner. Committee Member Breitling. I'm getting used to that. Mr. Parker.
The key word in there that, that made me hesitate was services. If someone is donating time for a city event, and that would have to get approved by council in advance, that can't be what you were intending. But that donation of time could be confused as services. So that was one thing. And then our Recreation and Community Services Manager just identified to me, when we went through the 4th of July show, we had over $40,000 in donations that were provided to the city in cash. And I'm not sure prior to, I mean, that's just cash. So maybe that's a little, money that would fall in this. Be approved prior to, how did that end? That recommendation?
Right there.
City Council after a proper review by the appropriate city department.
Okay.
So
Maybe in the monetary case.
I see where you're going with this, okay? So I think that, raising $40,000 for the 4th of July fireworks or even for the Christmas parade, to me, those are separate events, but we still need to be careful about the way we word this, and I appreciate that. Those are separate. I think this is all aimed at permanent additions or structures to the city, whether it be a park bench, on public property. Okay, so I think improvements. I don't think a $40,000 for the 4th of July is a public improvement. It's a public function. It's something we all do on, but I appreciate the heads up there, because I don't want to. What we don't want to do is paint ourselves into a corner that we can't get out of. So go ahead.
The goal here, I think, is to create language that relates to the facility naming policy, which in itself is an awkward name for that because it is more inclusive than that. The reason I put in money and services because the greater part of the basketball, the greater part of the memorial, the greater part of the larger projects that occupy city property, public property, has a lot of working parts, much of which is donating money, organizing people, having the expertise. And you look at some of the other policies of other cities, they do very carefully spell out that money and services are sort of part of it. So I'm just trying to get at the crux that says, if you improve public property, that it's almost too narrow to suggest that the improvement of public property is just about naming the thing, or just about the art or memorial thing. So if public property is going to be improved through the donation of, and money and expertise and supervision are part of that, I think we have to at least put it somewhere, maybe not in the motion. But one of the things I have heard is that, well, this person did that. Where did they get the authority to do that? These people gave money for this. So I don't see any, the correlation is not meant to be the 4th of July, et cetera. It's meant to address the activity that currently is addressed through the facility naming policy stuff. So whatever changes need to be made to clarify and exclude, as an amendment, as a motion maker, I'm happy to.
So your motion was relating to the new business portion of the staff report, where we were looking for a recommendation on the clarification of that bullet point 4D. Is that correct, or is it relating to the?
This all stems off of the original request for this committee to review the facility naming policy and to address the issues that weren't in there, but that were related to a facility naming policy event, the basketball court, and the use of plaques, et cetera. So as I understand what you're saying, is that what you just mentioned really is kind of part of that.
Right.
But, so my motion addresses the original goal of how to clarify, and yes, by taking the word submission to the city in every case and instance, and things that vague, and giving it specificity, whatever that word is, yeah. So if we need to insert something in the motion that addresses, I move that the facility naming policy incorporate that all donations, list, are there. That was my intent.
Okay, very good. That's
Not
helpful.
public fundraising for events and programs, certainly.
Yeah, or volunteer hours.
I actually think you kind of got to what I was going to say was just if we just inserted something to the effects of staff coordinated projects so that we didn't have to do, Jane Doe submitted $100 and John Smith submitted $2. We just say staff coordinated projects, which obviously you had approval before we did the fireworks display anyway.
You accept that amendment? Because let's be real honest, this all thing, we're here because somebody did a really good thing, but then erected something that was offensive to one or a group of people, whatever, which they're certainly entitled to their opinion, and it wasn't approved. It was not, it was just done. And like I say, to your point, Mr. Parker, nobody's going to complain about a park bench and stuff like that, but if we're going to go ahead and do it, it's a wide sweeping thing so that future councils, future things are not going to have to endure this. It's public knowledge, it's public, it's transparency, and that's what we're doing. Yeah. Okay. So do we want to try and rewrite this motion, or before we, first of all, I think Robert would be rolling his grave, so the motion on the floor that we have all in favor of the one that is first put out?
With
Well-
the two amendments, right?
Well, okay, so here's my thing. The First Amendment, I'm pretty sure is going to be amended and rewritten, but because we had a motion and it's second, we have to vote. I think Robert's rule says we have to vote on that. I don't know, but unless you want to accept it, that's fine. You withdraw your motion? You withdraw your second?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, good.
I think we're all on the same page, but just getting, and what would be helpful for me personally is if we're modifying that existing policy, where this language is going in particular. So the three words that I added, I think goes a long ways, but if that's not entirely what you want, then point not just what the language is, but where in there we can modify it.
So if I was to say, I move the acceptance of all donations relative to the facility naming policy. Be approved by the city council after review by the after proper review by the appropriate city department. Therefore, I'm addressing, I move that the acceptance of all donations related to the facility naming policy be approved by the city council after proper review by the appropriate city department.
Yeah, I completely understand that and can make sure that makes it in. I can handle that.
Okay, donations to me is not enough of a definitive word for this. I think you have to talk about, like you talked about before, signs, structures, that kind of stuff.
My understanding was that's why the relative to the facility naming policy comes into play. Those are the items that fall under
Under the facility naming policy.
Yeah.
Okay, Commissioner Flores, Mike.
I just want to say that I think everything that is in this motion is also encompassed in the submission. And if we just move to adopt this submission, it would cover everything that we're talking about in the motion.
But does the submission have all of it, everything going to the council? Because I don't believe the submission does.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Mike?
Sorry. It just needs to add that one line. But I think what this submission is including is, because I don't see that in the facilities naming policy, is getting into the weeds. So this gets into the weeds a little bit, enough to, I think, solve some of the things that are lacking in that current policy, and then it solves, and just by adding a final approval by the city council with the exact same language as Don, his motion is perfect. But adding that to this, I think you have everything covered 100%.
Okay, so do we need to rewrite the motion? I mean,
The way it read to me was fine. Mr. Parker, though, I do,
Well,
your opinion.
within the motion, we're directing the attention to the original project, facility naming policy. We could add to the motion, or I could add to the motion, that we've also submitted a recommendation for execution of whatever. James's submission is very definitive, but it's very department-oriented. It is the
Right.
core of the process of the department, I suppose. It's weighted towards a lot of department approval along the way, which probably is advantageous. But the ultimate decision comes from the council and their ability to say and support and stand by their district in saying, this is X. So if there's a way to insert that we have provided a thorough submission, a statement of clarification, Monica's, and a sample from a city of like size, then that would incorporate both the wishes of final council approval with a strong departmental approach and the fact that this committee provided some examples that might be followed. So if somehow Mr. Parker has been able to take all those words and put them into 3 or 4 words, and we believe we have a motion that we all understand, then I would be happy with the edits.
I'm not that good. Here's what I'm gonna try. Basically, there were 2 items in front of you. One was how you would modify the actual facility naming policy to provide the clarification. That seems pretty unanimous here. My proposed 3-word submission to the city council for approval makes clear in that sentence, it already got approved by the director, so you already have the departmental aspect. That, I think, clarifies a lot of it. It doesn't cover 100% of it, but that's where the detailed donation policy that Mr. Breitling drafted, that generally it sounds like everyone is supportive of, comes into play. So if you're saying make that 3-word change of adding city council for approval and accept Mr. Breitling's recommended policy, I would add the caveat, let staff review and tweak to, or provide suggested edits to that and come back for approval before it goes to council.
Papers, another city, Mr. Breitling's, and Monica's 1 page. So if we just accompany those as attachments, part of our job, as I understand it, was to look and see what we could come up with and take examples from other city and create examples. So those 3 documents that are part of the packet do provide guidance or recommendations or ideas for the existing policy with a 3-word change.
Sure. So the 3-word change, provide these items to staff to propose edits, come back for approval before going to council for the final approval. And in the meantime, we could, or maybe we could wait either way, with the facility naming policy 3-word change to provide the clarification there. We did a lot of talking to get there, but it seems like that's a pretty easy motion at that point.
Do all the committee members feel confident with this? Comfortable? So is our motion going to be, okay. We are going to present this, I'm going to be standing in front of the council presenting this, okay? So we're going to have Mr. Breitling's, Mr. Osborne's, your 3 words, and Ms. Mariquin's staff is going to put that all together for us?
I would say the 3-word I can put together.
You already did.
Yeah, you're right. That's why I said I
Not on any limbs there, but that's okay.
the others, it would take us some time to go through and especially hearing everything that's been shared today, making sure, for instance, I've already seen a change in here, the accepting donations. I would tweak aspects of that. So I don't think this should go to council for approval until staff has a chance to provide input into that and suggested edits. We would still go back through you to make sure that's what you wanted to recommend.
So looking for my committee members' opinions, would you feel better that we table this to the March 2nd meeting and let staff come back to us with what we're going to present? Because right now, it seems, I understand where you want to move on, but my problem is that we're kind of like saying, okay, we're going to vote on this, but then staff is going to tweak it, and we're not going to have a voice in what's going to be tweaked. Go ahead, Ms. Flores.
Why don't we just vote to recommend that staff and city council receive both this version, and staff receive this version, and then make their edits and submit both to city council, the original with their edited version.
Okay, so because I feel that if we have put so much time into this, that whatever version gets presented, whether it be 1 or 2 or even 3, whatever version gets presented to city council should be the one that we advise that should be accepted by them. With all due respect to staff.
No, I would prefer that it come back to you to make sure that what your recommendation was is still intact with the modifications that staff has proposed before it goes to council.
See what I'm saying? Because if we do that, then not that we have to have control, but I mean, why are we even doing this? We could have just said here, 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 and then come up with that. That's why.
Well, we can do an emergency meeting as soon as staff has it theirs prepared.
That's fine.
So that we don't wait till March.
No, I'm cool with that. I have no problem with that. But I mean, it's a matter of time and all that.
If we can pull that off, I'm happy to.
We could do it,
to
I mean,
schedule an earlier meeting.
Yeah, that's fine. Set it up, we'll do it. That's cool. Right? I mean, okay. All right, hold on. Mr. Osborne, then Ms. Merrickman. Ms. Merrickman. Mike.
Okay, so there's 2 issues at hand, right? The donation policy and the naming policy. I think that the motion addressed the naming policy with the edits that we were all in agreement with, right? So couldn't we move forward with that motion? Why couldn't we move? I guess the question is, why couldn't we move forward with that motion? I think it's complete. It is in line with how we all feel and what we would be comfortable recommending to the city. And the second part of it is the donation policy, which again, we all agree with, without any edits. Is that right? I'm not sure what I'm missing.
Well, what we're missing is, hold on. Well, okay, again, what I think we're missing is that we're going to approve this, and then we're going to give it to staff to tweak, and then whatever gets tweaked is going to be what I'm going to be handed, or whoever's going to be appear before council to present it is going to present it. And my question is, what is tweaked, because if we're giving the permission to be tweaked, what if what is tweaked is not what we intended in the first place? Then we've really wasted our time. But that's my point, is that if you want to go ahead and make the motion to approve with the codicil that staff takes these motions as they are, tweaks them if needed, then comes back and presents them to us, and then we present it, that's fine. But to me, it's the same thing. I mean, it doesn't matter to me. I just want our committee to be the final word with staff's input. There's no doubt I'm not belittling or discounting staff's input at all. But with staff's input, with all these new verbiages and stuff like that, the 3 words that you brought up, the great work that you did, the page and the stuff that you did, all of that, I want to make sure that what we present to City Council was our final advisory, not something that was tweaked and then presented. That's where I'm at. Mr. Osborne?
As I understand it, we have one, that this committee is recommending that the final approval of all activities within the facility naming policy be directed to come from the city council itself. That within the naming policy, we change the words to make sure that the word submission to the city is corrected to approval by the city council. And thirdly, that we want to make sure that we pass along the 3 recommended examples to the staff for their potential use. So if the motion was that I would move that the facility naming policy direct all final approval to the city council, and that the language within the facility naming policy was specific relative to city council or city department, and that we also are including a packet of recommendations for the city department to review and utilize accordingly. That'll probably never.
That sounds like
be
a
the
great
same way
motion.
Twice, but if we,
Second.
and I'd be happy to work on the specific words we were missing here.
The beauty of that recommendation is that this is live streamed and we can go back and record it exactly what you said.
It's been moved and seconded that live stream, whatever, okay? So I'm going to call for the vote. All in favor? Okay. All opposed? No. It's passed 5-0, so now we don't need a special meeting, correct? It's all good. Yeah, well, absolutely. We can have a party. It'd be, yeah. All right.
I just think as long as everything stays within the spirit of and the intent of what we've submitted, we're good.
That's
It's
fine.
a cake. I mean, it's not that hard. You have the majority of the bulk is already done. Add 2 pages and
Okay, good. Go ahead.
Can we define staff? Because if the staff that's going to look at it is already here and you've already looked at it, are there things that needed to be added to it or changed other than what we've already discussed so that we could move forward, or do we need further review?
I would want Public Works, who's going to be involved in the vast majority, if not all, of the donations, to get a chance to have their real-life situations that they've experienced applied towards what's here and see if there's any modifications that might need to be made from that perspective.
Yeah, I think the key is that it has to go to city council. And all right. I am going to yield to what Ms. Mariquin, Ms. Flores, and Mr. Breitling have requested, that we table the athletic facility policy fees to the next meeting in March. No, just kidding. Just kidding. Just kidding. Sorry. Gotcha, though. All right. New business, the athletic facility policies and fees. Welcome.
Thank you so much. My notes say good afternoon, but good evening, Chair Shorey and committee members. As requested, we have brought back the athletic facilities policies and fees item to you today, and we've included some additional information for consideration. First and foremost, the modified athletic facilities policy and procedures manual has been attached to the staff report and includes notes with justifications for various changes. Most of the changes to the policies and procedures are minor, and they were made to increase efficiency for staff, to protect the city, or to prepare for possible expansion of services in the future. Page 9 of the manual is a focus of ours today as it pertains to the payment. As previously discussed, the policy adopted in 2018 states that all users will pay for field use per the user fee schedule. However, previous management waived or modified fees for two groups in particular. First, Upland National Little League is not charged for field or light use. The reasoning provided to current staff was that fees were waived because the league does not charge their participants to play and due to significant contributions to the city parks utilized by those leagues. Second, the user fee schedule indicates that the fees are charged per hour per field. However, currently, ASO pays for one field when in actuality they use all 6 at Cabrillo Park. In 2019, ASO should have paid $8,190, but only paid $1,365. As written in the staff report, there are a few alternatives to be explored, but ultimately staff's recommendation is to follow the policy as written. All users pay for field and light use per hour per field. With that, the discussion can begin, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
I'm going to jump in right away. As a parent and a coach who coached for his 2 boys for 15 years and his daughter for 6 years of ASO, okay. I know the amount of work and volunteer hours that those people put into that facility. I also know of the times that I would show up for practice with especially most recently with my daughter's team, and there would be a pickup game of residents on the field, And for me, it was easy. They said, okay, coach, we're going to leave. But other coaches actually got challenged by the people that were using the field. ASO embodies a large part of Upland youth, as well as ancillary cities around that use those fields. I don't know that charging them for the use of those fields, other than, I mean, maybe you might want to raise their annual fee, but the hourly and stuff like that, I don't know if that's just and fair for what they bring to the city as far as the youth that plays there. That's just my opinion.
If I can make a comment, other organizations, I agree with you. They do have a lot of the youth, the local youth involved, as do the other little leagues as well. If we were to modify the policy and adopt it to how ASO is operating and how their fees are being assessed, we might want to consider doing the same for the other organizations that utilize multiple fields at the same location. We can charge per complex or per park versus per hour per field. That would be at the committee's recommendation.
I mean, I don't know how much revenue, I mean, how much of a loss there is in the maintenance from the city's standpoint, okay? Because I know they're mowing the fields and stuff like that, and you have lights, and I know the charge for lights and stuff like that, right? Yeah, right. Mike?
Just a quick question. With the lights, and I looked at the charges that the fees that the city charges, and I hate to say it, but they appear very low, very low. So is there, for those, I mean, do we know what the cost of, a game, what the fee would be versus how much we are paying out of pocket for it?
We actually still have struggled to identify how much it costs to actually light the one field, because the lights are connected to the other park lights as well as street lights nearby.
Gotcha.
It's been a really big challenge this year to try and figure that part out. And I don't know where the fees came from initially back in 2018 when they were first put on, but I know ASO themselves pay for 6 lighted fields, but the user fees is what they're only paying for one field for.
Right.
Whereas with Upland National, they are neither paying lights nor user fees.
Because they don't charge their participants, right? So the situation here, guys, from somebody that's been in swam in those waters, is going all the way back. There was no fees whatsoever. I mean, and then fees were generated, and fundraisers were created to try and offset the fees and stuff like that. But what we got to be very careful on here is something like an ASO or something like an, what's the one up at Flowers Field? Is that up? That's not Upland National. Upland National's down on
I haven't memorized the
Yeah,
fields yet.
whatever,
Stacy,
but-
who plays at Flowers?
Upland Foothill. I should know because the boys play there. But, I mean, those are one fields. Those are, teams can, they can charge that. But when you have, that's by far and above the participation, the public participation from a sporting event is definitively soccer. It just doesn't cover fall. They also have spring. And now I'm not opposed to if a club team wants to come in and use the facility, or if somebody wants to have a pickup game or something like that. But you gotta be careful, because if you're charging, like for instance, there are nights where the older kids play, so like or practice, I should say. So you go from let's say 6:30 to 8 are the practice times. Not a lot of the younger kids have already gone home. They've already done practicing, and there are other. Then they're lit. They're all lit because you can't turn them all off, right, one at a time. And so you got residents that are just up there using the park, playing a pickup game of soccer and stuff like that. Or you have a coach that'll use it as a clinic, because he's charging people, but he says, oh, here, this field's open because it's a public park. And so how do you not charge those people? You see, that's my cue to stop. So
the lights are able to be turned on and off by the user groups that are assigned. We have a system called lights on sites, that they're able to do it remotely. So in the case that an organization left their lights on after their practices were over, they would be charged for the lights that were left on, and that is a violation of the policy. We are working on getting staff members on board 7 days a week to be able to monitor those things, and when we come across. So if I understand correctly, we have a handful of fields that are lights on sites, and then I believe it's Memorial Park and Olivedale that are not with lights on sites. Yeah, those two are not with lights on sites, but through the Musco system can be turned off remotely. Yeah. So if there are ball field lights that are on and no one on that field, that's a violation of the policy because staff would not have turned those lights on without someone being out there.
Is one of the issues equity? Because as my observation is we're talking about group 2. And group 2 has 9 listings here. 9 different organizations, 2 of which have been noted for not paying certain fees. And yet they do make remarkable, at least in one example, contributions to the upkeep instead of the field, which is what Hilltoppers was talking about when we had our last meeting. But at one level, they're all group 2, they're all nonprofit. So one could assume, maybe incorrectly, that 7 of the 9 are paying their fees, according to what I can see, basically, yet they're nonprofit, and 2 are not paying certain fees for one of 2 reasons. One is because they're nonprofit and they don't have the mechanism in place to raise funds to pay the fees. The other might be because is that they provide services for upkeep of the field, et cetera, but we don't have any schedule to quantify that. So anytime somebody says, I did this, or I did that, or Hilltoppers has done this for many years, and my kids were part of Hilltoppers, we don't have a schedule to create equity. So my first point is that if 9 people are nonprofit group 2, there's no equity in 2 of them making an argument that the others aren't making or can't make or won't make. As far as the trading of services or maintenance or materials, in the absence of some schedule to quantify that, we can't really say, by the way, you're a credit to the community, and we're going to not charge you X, which equates to X dollars, and those X dollars are quantified by the fact that whenever you refurbish a field or do X, Y, Z, you're saving us city money for maintenance or materials. So my question is, if it's a matter of equity, can we either create a schedule of in-kind services that allows us to quantify what your discount should be? And secondarily, is there any equity in having 2 people? If I was one of the other 7 and I'm in group 2 and I'm a nonprofit and I recognize that one of the 9 as a nonprofit who didn't have a mechanism to raise funds to pay for those fees, I would be saying the same thing. What would prevent me from saying, I'm 7 of the 9, we're the same boat. We do charge fees because we have to pay the fees. We charge our kids fees. But if somebody else doesn't have to charge their kids, quote, certain fees and not pay your fees, then I want that too. So, therefore, if we can provide an equity schedule of like-in-kind services that we know, relatively speaking, offsets the cost of the city not providing materials or labor, et cetera, that would seem to be equitable. But to simply allow somebody to say, but simply to allow the fact that your nonprofit isn't structured to create enough revenue on your side to pay fees and everybody else is doing that, that's not equitable. You can't, it's equitable in the sense that when you don't have a lot of mechanisms and a lot of oversight, it happens. But it's not equitable on the face of it. So do we, A, have the ability to assess the value of in-kind services, for lack of a better word? And if so, would that be a way to do it? And then individually, you're going to have to discuss with I got my glasses on, I should be able to read this, but the United people, what is it we can do to work together to help you do what everybody else is doing? And I can't project that if everybody else can do it, there must be an equity in the fact we can help them see how to raise the proper funds to meet the fees, or give the in-kind services that would offset the fees that they can't or won't pay.
Mr. Breiling?
So in looking at the user on page 39 of 49, going along the lines of what Don's talking about with equity, I noticed that in the red, there are several parts on this page and then on the opposite side where it says group 3 and 4 users will be charged fees to offset public expenses to operate, maintain, supervise, and administer the use of parks and athletic facilities. Why just 3 and 4? Why not 1 and 2? I mean, I know one is the city and residents. I get that, but the part that I didn't understand is on the other side where it says user group 2 will be required to make payment in full within 30 days, and this is for their deposit.
No, that would be for their user fees.
For the user fees, okay, but then group 3 and 4 will be financially responsible for any charges, fees applicable to the use of facility, but yet group 2 is not.
Correct. Because we know ahead of time that group 2 users, such as the groups that are listed here, we know what their schedule is going to be in advance, and any cancellations or anything like that, they connect with Stacy, and she generates the invoice. Group 3 and 4 users are generally outside users, club organizations, clinics, things like that, that we want to charge them up front, so that way it locks in the date and they're paying for those fields.
On that point, I remember at our last meeting, part of the discussion was, and Stacy, I'm sure will have the answer to this. If I remember correctly, it was that the high school reserves upfront and is able to get, nobody else has this ability, but they're able to get a lot more chunk of the time. And yet, just because they have it and don't use it, that it runs, does anybody recall that conversation? But the high school doesn't get charged for it, or do they?
At this point, they don't get charged. That's something that we're going to be working through with the joint use agreement regarding the amount of time that they get on the field and what potentially could happen when they're not using the field. It's a deeper discussion to have.
Okay, yeah, that was,
joint use,
right,
yeah.
but that was a big chunk of usage that was an issue, okay. Just
So
wanted to-
let me ask another question here, of education. So we have the organized groups that we can go ahead and charge accordingly, whatever the may be, that's fine. So how are we going to monitor the club teams that come in randomly, or the coach that's a trainer that comes and uses the same field randomly, or the guys that come from, from other cities, and have a pickup game because it's a public park, right? And they do it. How are we going to, if at all, monitor that?
So right now, the plan is for our park monitors to be the monitors of that and to observe and report and educate the users of the field that are really not supposed to be out there. What it's going to take is a much bigger project in adjusting the municipal code, because right now no one's technically breaking rules when they do that. There's a lot of liability out there for organized play that have the coaches, the trainers, things like that. So until our municipal code is changed to where we could get enforcement out there to say you are breaking the rules, you will be fined, or however that works out, we can monitor and we can educate the community at this point, but enforcing anything is going to be a big challenge until we update the municipal.
That needs to be addressed as well, because, for instance, in the sense of when my daughter was playing, and thank God it wasn't anybody, but one of the girls was, in the restroom there, and some person that was just a pickup game on the upper fields, right? Thank God that the dad went to check on the daughter, and the guy was walking into the girl's restroom. He said, "Hey, where you going?" And there was a little bit of a scuffle, but the guy ended up running away. So, and this could happen anywhere, I understand, but that's not necessarily the part of the policy. But I think that if you're going to, I mean, like, I saw the fees and they're minimal per hour for the organized people. And if somebody, like, if I wanted to have a birthday party for my daughter and they're gonna play soccer and I rent it for $45 an hour or whatever, that's fine. I just want to make sure that whatever we recommend to the council does not handicap the youth sports organizations from all across, from Flowers Field to American National to Greenbelt to ASO. I just don't want to, I would not want to be a part of that. So, I mean, in reading it before I came, and I left it on my desk, but the amount of time you put in this report was phenomenal, and you need to know it's appreciated. So thank you. But go ahead. Mr.
One more question. And Jessica, you know where I'm gonna, this is what I'm about to ask. We had discussions about this, but I see on page 34 of 49, in red, it shows field, any open space located at a park that may be utilized for athletic purposes. Using Sierra Vista Park as an example, and what we had, the issues we had this summer at that park, does this change make it so that what went on would be okay?
That would make it so that we could potentially allocate the field. We can put restrictions on it. Staff can put restrictions. In my past experience, we've only allowed 4 teams on a field or on a park like Sierra Vista. But the trash violations, the parking violations, things like that, that would become violations of this policy. Therefore, it could be held against the organization that was renting it out. But in that case.
And then following corrective educational.
Exactly.
Okay. Because I just got concerned when we say open field. Sierra Vista has that nice chunk of just open field, and just that 2 months of that use from those football teams and those parents, it was destroyed, and they didn't get to pay a penny for it. And I just want to make sure that this doesn't open that door up again for that kind of situation. Sorry, I keep forgetting the mic.
No, I completely agree with you. We, like I said earlier, we modified this a little bit to open up our services to if we found another park that might have an open space that could potentially be utilized for a small team's practice, something like that.
Right.
If eventually we want to rent out those basketball courts, this policy is going to allow that based on making it a little bit more general, not just sport field, athletic facilities.
Got it.
Okay, so what I'd like to know is, in line with Mr. Osborne's question, can we do the in-kind exchange? And if so, what does that look like?
Right, so we can definitely calculate out, we have maintenance worker costs that we are aware of. We would probably have to get an average sum of how many hours each of the organizations does put on the field. I know we were easily able to do that with the high school teams to quantify that, but we would definitely have to have conversations with each of those organizations. And then it's probably gonna get piggybacked with an actual donation policy. I'm not sure if we would want a separate donation policy for ball fields and a separate donation policy that exists citywide. It might want to be put a part of it. That's probably one of your guys' decisions, but in-kind services, it's kind of the same thing. So, but yes, we can quantify it we have maintenance worker costs, and then we know what they've done in the past.
So does everybody agree that keeping equity in mind, that would be one of the ways that we could solve that problem? Or is there a different alternative?
Well, I would just ask how a different group gets the same benefit. Because it's the way it's always been done, Group A gets to do this, and Group B, C, and D, like, just what?
And therein lies the slippery slope that you point out, you see, because, just because, I mean, Upland National doesn't charge. I mean, they don't charge their kids. So, their main revenue, if any, is from snack bar, stuff like that. So, how do you charge that? I mean, what do you do? I mean, ASO charges, back then it was like, I think 60 or 70 bucks a kid per year, whatever the fee was. And families that were in need weren't charged, stuff like that. But you're right. I mean, it's herding cats. I don't know how we go about it, but I think I just got this idea that Mr. Osborne does. So
Well, probably the wrong way to go about it is to simply say, charge your kids. But the reality is, some people do. The reality is that when you can't do something and you're allowed to do what you can do, and it's inconsistent with the policies in general, then you are the odd man out, odd person out. Now, that's not user-friendly. If we adopt a in-kind services schedule, at least you have something to offer. If you say to this particular group, your fees based on the schedule would be X. One way for you not to charge your kids is to perform or provide certain services. Now, there may be something else that goes on with that, but the precedent is set because ASO, in a sense, is already exercising that on quantified schedule, in a sense, by virtue of their history. Hilltoppers, as I understand it, has for years done this. They took it upon themselves to do that. Now, they're doing double duty, in a sense. They're not only providing in-kind services, but they're paying their fees. So if there is a nonprofit organization, and the other reality here is the whole group is nonprofit. It's not as though it's not stated. So where, at what point in time did one nonprofit get to slide, in essence? So, but maybe the olive leaf is to say, here's a schedule. So as an example, how much in fees is this particular nonprofit, who's part of Group 2, not paying? If you said, well, the bottom line is what they're not paying, I'll pick a number, is in the course of their total season in a given calendar year, what they're not paying is $3,000. If you're not paying $3,000 in the course of your relationship and registration and use of fields, then based on this schedule, here's what you can do. You find volunteers that will do stacks. Undoubtedly, there's a lot of fundraising that goes on here. I think it's probably somewhat truthful that you can't draw a straight line that there's no fundraising going on to offset the kids that are participating. They have 75, the ratio of the kids that are not within Upland are such that maybe it is an area, but they're doing lots of fundraising. So maybe in this case, this is the wrong term, but sweat equity may be the answer. That's in-kind services. They have people that could donate things, perhaps within their own sphere of influence. Let's say one thing that we do pay for are materials or grass or sod or whatever. Well, maybe they have somebody that will sponsor the team or sponsor the league that can donate those things, et cetera. So we can make a list. You could probably make a list of all the things that the people that people do. So if you can quantify the in-kind services, at least it's an offer. But at some point in time, you've got to say, we'll do everything we can to help you determine how to pay your fees. Here's one offer. But there's no equity in simply saying, I'm nonprofit. Well, so are the other 8.
I think the fee schedule is a great idea. It helps to quantify everything on paper and make everything visually attainable, hopefully, or at least goal-oriented. But I go back to Mr. Parker's comment about an hour ago. When we start to donate sweat equity, at what point do we cross the line? If we're making park improvements and we are physically shoveling or physically doing something, now I see what you're saying. Where does it come in where that prevailing wage problem kind of creeps up? Is there a line where an improvement versus a shovel in the ground is a shovel in the ground? If both parties are doing a hole, one's donating it and the other one has to be paid prevailing wage, what's the difference in the hole?
Let me take it a step further, okay? So when I was on the board with ASO and the boys are there, the city would mow fields. We would line the fields, we would take care of the fields. Water, of course, was provided, but the city would mow the fields. And we had a parent that said, wait a minute, I got a sit-down mower, I'll mow the fields. And the city said, no, because if you cut your foot or something like that, the liability is going to be on the city, and that's where it goes. Again, I'm reading off what Mr. Blay said, right? I mean, it's a liability issue for the city, right? Thank you. No, that's my point, is that this is such a wide thing. I mean, you're not gonna be able to stuff this all into this one situation. I mean, look at the amount of work that you put into this. I mean, this was, phenomenal. So I don't know how we can, I think that we have to do this in parts. I mean, you wanted athletic fees and facility and policies and fees. I think we should break it down to policy, okay, and what the fees are charged to use the user fees. Am I missing the boat here, or is that?
No, they kind of coincide with each other. I think you're right. I think our master fee schedule is going to be addressed in the future with all recreation and park fees. But the policy is one thing. Whatever the policy says, we just reference the user fees. So it'll be together but different.
So I just see this huge ball of string that we have to unravel, because you said it best, Sandy. How can one say okay and the other can't? That's the issue. Because what's going to happen is that's going to get out, okay? And even though Upland Foothill charges, and not that they may know or they may not know, but if a parent, oh my God, I can't believe it, why is it's going to create a problem. So I think that we need to be proactive on that and create an affordable schedule across the board for youth sports. When it comes to adult sports, it's a whole nother level, okay? It's, look at, because they can, go to Rancho if you want to play soccer, or you want to play basketball, or, you see what I'm saying? How do you, and who's going to police this?
On your point, I have an idea. I've seen some, and this is in reference to trash service and collection, but I've seen some cities, for example, the city of South El Monte, the residents do not pay a trash bill because they have so few residents. The commercial side pays all of it. So we have, I personally think that a lot of, for me personally, I see that the park, for example, the one over here, oh gosh, what's the one, the soccer one?
Cabrillo Field.
Park. Cabrillo Park, you can go there any time of the day, and it is a trash heap. It is destroyed. Councilman Garcia had a cleanup. I went out and we cleaned it up. By the next day, it almost looked identical. And it's not because of the AYSO kids at all. It is the adult youth leagues that come in and they utilize these parks. There's beer and everything thrown all over the place, and they trash it. And yet they pay a lower fee or a similar fee than to me, the increase in the fee can come from there.
Well, at the ASO level, there are each team, the parents have trash duty. There's duties that you work the snack bar, you do this, you do that. You have to at least earn your way. And they phenomenally do that. Whether they drink beer while they're doing it is a whole other story. But the point is that that's being done at ASO. I'm sure it's being done at what's the park on 15th? Thank you, Greenbelt. No, I'm sure it's being done, but the concern you have here is the uproar that is going to result from, wait a minute, we're doing all, because there was a time when ASO wanted to make that an ASO complex. There was a time it was just only ASO, and that was being kicked around about 6-7 years ago. And just like nobody else could use it except ASO. If teams wanted to come in, like club teams, they'd have to go through ASO to rent the thing, and then there'd be a fee paid to the city and so forth. But lock it down. The gate that goes to the apartments behind there was going to be taken down, all sorts of things, and just lock it down, and ASO was going to be in charge of it, okay? That never came to fruition, okay? That's fine, whatever. But the point is that I know the amount of work that's gone into Upland National. I know the amount of work that's gone into Upland Foothill, Greenbelt. Okay, so these these parents, these organizations of the youth sports have put sweat equity, for lack of a better term, into these fields. So that might be a justification for why they pay a little less, because it is about the youth. However, when it gets to the adults, it's a whole nother story. And that's just a suggestion, that's not an edict.
And maybe I'm mishearing here. If codifying in-kind services brings up a liability insurance question, then having known but uncodified in-kind services doesn't eliminate the question. It just keeps it in the dark. So am I mistaken, or is it not prudent to codify in-kind services rendered by individual community members as compensation for reducing fees? Is that something that we should not be going down the hole of? Rabbit intended?
Are there any other cities that take that approach?
No, the other cities, the surrounding cities, Public Works handles all of their maintenance. The only thing that organizations are permitted to do is prep their field, which is potentially just a drag, just a water, just a lining. That's it.
So with being too bold, we're already allowing or observe that some organizations over time, in exchange for their goodwill and good service, are in a different fee structure in reality. We shouldn't extend that. We should find a more prudent way, a more equitable way for everybody to pay fees they can afford, and find a way to help organizations who want to use the fields but are not structured, even though they're nonprofits as the others are, to help them see ways in a suggestive manner, not a legal manner, to remedy that. Or understand that we're going to disappoint some people because they are no longer going to be able to rent the fields without what was the recommended staff objective of one category, everybody pays, group 2. So I guess the question is it better for us to come up with a solution that doesn't codify common practice so that everybody is in the right liability protection group?
The easiest thing for staff would be to treat everybody the same. And you mentioned equity, and that's, that's easy. Quantifying the work and verifying that it was done, and how many hours they put in. And some of the lining of the field and the dragging of the field specifically benefits the one game that's about to play, because by the next day it needs to be drug again and lined again. And so there, that assistance is self-serving in a way, and that's why you mentioned lining the fields before an AYSO game. It was so the kids could play and have defined boundaries. And so it doesn't necessarily benefit the park as a whole. It benefited that group, that day, that game. And so, as uncomfortable as it might be for those that have not been paying, it's rather than track hours and in-kind donations and get into that, treating everybody the same. And the fees are, you mentioned it, they're super low. And it's more a case of it creates accountability for our scheduler to schedule the field, that if they have a few dollars at stake, they're going to use the field when they say they're going to use it. Because if I don't have any skin in the game and I say I want to reserve the field from 6 to 8 tonight, and then I don't show up, well, it doesn't cost me anything, And so it's kind of it helps create order. These fees help create a sense of whose turn it is, and they're very equitable about spreading out who gets to use the fields, and it's just be easier for staff to do it that way.
I have a question. what is the opinion of creating two groups? One group is youth sports. Okay, so I'm talking about youth sports. I mean, high school and under, youth sports. That is one set of fees. And the reason is my passion is that we do everything we can to not prohibit youth to play whatever sport they want to play. And then there's an adult, whatever else, or trainers or whatever else. We create a second group for that and a separate set of fees for that. And I'm not saying that you have to keep the fees as low as we see them, but they're significantly more affordable so that the city can continue, whatever the sport may be, to provide a venue for youth sports to happen. What's the theory on that?
So what you're saying is by creating the two groups and creating two different fee schedules, one can help, I hate to use the word subsidize, but subsidize the other to give the youth sports more options. That's how I see it. I think that's a good idea. It's out of the box thinking, and
I just think that, look at, we've all had kids, or I mean, most of us had kids that, and go into those fields and seeing them play and develop and stuff like that over time. I mean, it's just to take that away or to risk taking that away or diminishing those opportunities, I think would be a bruise on our city. So I think that we need to go and think about a separate set of fees. Again, I'm not saying we have to stay status quo as low as they are, but make them affordable enough that there's some kind of movement to the right way. But then also if adult leagues are going to come in or club teams are going to come in, and I understand club teams are youth sports, but club teams are in my opinion, and I had one, an entitled, affordable, because these parents are paying, to have these kids there. They can afford it. Not that a lot of these kids playing ASO kids, families can't afford it, but I'm looking broad-wise. So I don't know, Jessica, what do you think of that? What's your opinion from your position on that?
So the way that we do have it broken down, just for clarification, are you saying that an organization, potentially Corona Angels 12 and under, could come use Upland's fields for the
I'm talking about Upland-based youth sports, Upland National, Hilltoppers, Foothill, ASO. What am I missing?
So our resident youth groups right now.
If there's an Upland Pop Warner team.
That's a $3 per hour. Are you suggesting eliminating that fee?
I'm not, if that's being paid now, that's fine. Okay, then that's fine.
So that is the current fee right now, is $3 per hour. Any outside youth organization, they're charged $15 per hour. Adult organizations are charged $30 per hour. Significant difference.
You already have that. I mean, that's why
Absolutely.
I want to make sure that wasn't changing from what I read. Okay.
No, not at all.
All right.
Just so I understand it, the directive tonight is to find out whether we want to charge the one group that's not paying the current fee. And the proposal was that we do so because it levels the field for everyone, and we do so without an in-kind payment back.
Yes, that is correct. In addition to the hard cost light fees that we have as well.
Fair motion.
I will reiterate that any motion that is made, that it's not changing the policy. It's a matter of us enforcing the policy when we are resisted from the organizations that this is going to be affecting. National.
It gives you more teeth. No, right? Right. It gives you something to fall back on, saying, "Hey, look this is what the council decided on."
Yes, sir. The other point would be the 6 fields with ASO versus other organizations. That's the other point that if we are going to change what the user fee schedule would be, per hour per field or per park per hour. Because ASO, Hilltoppers has 3 fields that they can utilize. The other parks that have multiple fields, those organizations are being charged. They're at $3 per hour per field.
Which they pay.
Correct. However, if we're consistent with how ASO is paying right now, they would pay for 1 field per hour. $3. $3. So, no, yes. Right now they should be paying $18. Then there's really no changes to the policy with regard to the recommendations that we're just going to stick with the policy and the enforcement.
I think you've done a fantastic job of putting this together. And as I look at the edits in terms of the handbook, kudos to that as well. But the facts that I now seem to appear is that in Group 2, there are 2 groups that are simply not paying their current scheduled bills.
Correct.
And those 2 groups have each offered different reasons for not paying these horrendous fees, sarcasm included. One is we don't charge our kids, yet we're a nonprofit. Now, I do recognize that the other people on this list are either the high school or Western Christian. I do recognize that there's a small number of people. So the bottom line is we have two people in Group 2 that are not paying $3 an hour for small fees for incremental specific use. One, I understand, charges a lot to their kids anyway, ASO. The other, which apparently doesn't charge their kids much and raises funds. But both of which are being asked to pay an incredibly small fee. This isn't $3 per kid per hour. This is $3 per hour. So in the case of ASO, how many hours, if billed fully in a given season, is this? So they're occupying 6 fields at $3 an hour, $18 an hour. And how many hours is it typically rented for on a particular day? 2 or 3? So I'm not belittling the number as much as just trying to do the math. All this exercise is around 2 teams with history. And if you are provided with the recommendation that all people in all groups pay the stated fees, and that we appreciate the in-kind services that are done to prep the field and stay away from the fact that other services may be rendered but not solicited or codified, you have what you need to have the constructive conversation to help them out. And we don't go down any paths that are dubious at best, given the way things work these days. So we could move that the motion could be that I would move that the staff recommendation that all Group 2 organizations be required to pay user fees and light fees based on the Athletic Facilities Policies and Procedures Handbook and Master Fee Schedule.
Second. I'll be brief. I just would like to maybe ask if you have spoken to Fontana about their fields, their fees, because they're beautiful and immaculate.
They're what?
Beautiful,
Yeah.
beautiful and immaculate. They're.
Did.
Oh.
That's why Jessica was to work there, and then she raised the fees to $1,000 an hour, and that's why.
I actually oversaw the 43 ball fields in Fontana. That's where I authored their policies, and when I came to Upland, noticed that a lot of what I had written was here utilized. Back then, back in 2010, 2011-ish, The user fees were assessed because we were trying to get The user fees were assessed because we were trying to bring park monitors on. We had a lot of outside organizations, non-residents lying to us, telling us that we have, 200 Fontana kids, when in actuality they were club teams and stuff. So the user fees were assessed specifically to bring in park monitors. And they were very low, very nominal, $1 per hour, $2 per hour, way back then.
I think if you have the monitors, that's going to help. All right, there's a motion. Oh,
Also, I just so that doesn't get lost, because I know after we vote we'll be finished. I just would like to make a recommendation that we increase those fees at some point soon. Also, the cancellation issue that James brought up and also came up last time, is that in their a fee, a cancellation fee, since they were?
It's not necessarily a fee, but it's keeping the deposits for the outside organizations. The cancellation for the Group 2 users, they're not assessed a cancellation fee. They're just not charged for those hours because we invoice them afterwards.
okay. So we have a motion on the floor. Do we need to, we don't need it reread, right? Okay, so all in favor? Okay, passes 5-0. Jessica, you've done a wonderful job. Thank you as always.
I do have to give a lot of credit to Stacy. She's the one that deals with everyone on the daily, so she put in a lot.
Well, Stacy kept holding up a little sign. She's got it hidden now. Says, "Don't forget to talk about me." So, great job, Stacy. Thank you for the great job you do as well. Okay, moving on. Now, it says city manager comments. Do you have any other comments, city manager? Mr. Blay?
After your marathon meeting? No.
Wow.
Let me pass it on to Stephen, who might.
You and I are going to get along just fine, Mr. Blay.
I'm not the city manager, so I don't have actually an authority to speak at this point.
Okay, good. Well, that's good. So anyway, so let me tell you about our Thanksgiving dinner. We're going to adjourn, but before we adjourn, I'm going to let you guys know one thing, okay? So one thing I did last year, usually I have my Christmas luncheon with my agents, and we couldn't have it because of COVID. So what I did, I came up with the idea to do Santa Zoom calls. So if you have young kids, like whether it be your own or nieces or nephews or even grandkids, and you wanted to have a Santa Zoom call, let me know, and we'll do it. No problem. That's it. And with that, I wish everybody a Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. To Mr. Parker, who led us into this, you've done a good job. We haven't met us in a Brown Act violation, but two of us have gotten together, and we're going to go to council, recommend that you are always here. Mr. Blay, welcome aboard. We're glad you're here. We're looking forward to building the future of the city with you. Jessica, great job. To everybody else, thank you.